talk about CBDCs, but also about enterprise solutions for cryptos and blockchain. And after that, we're going to hand out the Dutch Blockchain Awards. Really, really excited for that one. We're going to start with the first discussion, the first conversation with Igor Mikhalev from EY. Igor. And once again, I'm going to post here the QR codes. Where is it? Please have a seat over here. Would be great. Many thanks. There's no QR code. Here's a QR code. Should you have any questions for our speakers, then please, join me on Mentimeter, and then the questions will pop up here. All right. Now I go right slide again. I'm doing 1,000 things.
All right. Can you guys hear me? I think so. Right.
Wonderful.
So,
your microphone is working. Igor,
yes.
Now when we started the pre-conversation, it was interesting because you were working for EY. So I thought like, okay, you're mainly busy with things like corporate integrations of blockchain. But you are one of the first things where I was surprised of. You are founder of the CBDCtracker.com, which
Absolutely.
is I think one of the more interesting websites when it comes to CBDC.
Which is surely also an open source project. Right, so CBDC Tracker, which I founded a couple of years ago, is the top in the world source for CBDC-related information, and it's driven by an open source community of enthusiasts. So that's indeed what I've created a couple of years ago. Happy to do that.
And it shows all the activity when it comes to CBDCs on the global sphere?
Yeah, absolutely, because CBDC is an interesting game. So it's from one side pushed by central banks and regulators, but on the other hand, it is something that people really want to have because they want to have a safer way and more convenient, more user-friendly way of dealing with payments, with value transfers, and so forth.
You say people want to have. We just heard Peter Slachter, Bert Slachter, apologies, Bert Slachter, who actually mentioned that people don't want to have CBDCs.
Yes, there is a bit of a dualism in this question, of course. Right, because CBDC is often associated with control and total sort of surveillance capitalism.
Like in China.
Yeah, which nobody wants, right? Nobody wants that. However, people want to have utility associated with digital currencies. And that's the role of government, to be able to bring something to people that is useful, that is convenient, but not obstructing their right to be anonymous when needed and transact freely. However, surely there are multiple schools of thought, right? And nobody knows where it will go eventually.
So you're tracking all these developments. What kind of cool developments do you see? Is it just countries that are launching their CBDCs or also other developments?
Right. So no, typically developments around CBDCs are mapped around several stages. First, a country does a POC, then a country does a pilot, a proof of concept. Right, so they do a limited proof of concept to show how certain technology performs in a limited scale. Then they do a pilot, so basically an end-to-end piloting of digital currency that goes from a merchant to acquire all the way towards a bank and a central bank, so a little pilot. And then they do a fully blown rollout. So interesting observation that I can make, maybe if I can do it quick, is that it depends on a certain jurisdiction. So in jurisdictions where the real-time gross settlement systems, RTGS, CHAPS, and so forth are mature, and where the legislation is mature, people are more of an incrementalist mindset. So nobody wants to break everything and create something new from scratch. Nobody wants to say, hey, we're going to throw away existing ecosystem and just create something on the basis of a BNB smart chain. However, in other jurisdictions where they want to experiment more, where the ecosystem is not as stable, they are more prone to risky moves, and that's where you have more of a crypto-native approach to CBDCs. So that's one interesting observation that I can share with you now.
But you're also working for EY on CBDCs, right?
Of course.
For banks even?
So CBDCs impact the entire value chain when it comes to payments and value transfers. It's central banks, commercial banks, it's PSPs, payment service providers, as well as merchants. And of course, to some extent, it also concerns credit card schemes.
Yeah.
Right? We work for all of them.
Yeah. Now, there's a lot of other things to unpack because you're not just working on the enterprise or CBDCs, you also worked on DAOs with the founder of Cardano.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's exactly true. So a few years ago, I worked for Charles Hoskinson, the founder of Cardano, and he told me that, I'm a little bit tired of managing everything myself. Wouldn't it be good to actually have a DAO manage the process of incubation, quality control, creation of different ventures, and deployment of different ventures in the Cardano's ecosystem and beyond. So yeah, and we have designed a certain DAO-based structure that we call DCF, Decentralized Consortium Funding, which is supposed to carry forward the whole momentum around Cardano.
And is this also, because you're also working for DAOs on companies, is this also functioning for companies and organizations?
Yeah, surely. Well, basically, whenever a client comes to us and they want to have a DAO implemented, the first, let's say, rookie mistake is company trying to basically stretch the concept of a DAO around the current business model, around the existing, let's say, BV or LTD, which is not something that's going to work. So we always help our clients to take a step back, redesign the way they create and capture value, so redesign digital ecosystem around their business model, and then we can happily deploy the incentivization mechanism for a DAO, token economics, and so forth.
So organizations, they contact you, like, hey, can we set up a DAO within our organization, as an organization, but do you also sometimes just advise them, like, not to DAO?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's exactly the value of consulting companies like ourselves that can bring to the table, instead of, as usual, saying, hey, let's build it, it's so awesome, forget about everything, let's just build a nice DAO right here, right now. We are just a group of developers that will make it happen for you today. So what we do is we take a step back and we think about it from the business case, business model, financial model, and the legal tax ecosystem around it. Right? So we first of all make sure that in principle it's going to work, there's enough momentum to carry it forward, and then we build something.
What is the most common made mistake, what you see here with the implementation?
Yes, that's ignoring the ecosystem around a certain offering. Because in the world of Web3, nothing works without an ecosystem. Some people call it Web3 Lego building blocks, right? So without relying on some of the blocks below and above you, without thinking about the traction in the ecosystem, well, nothing is going to work. So that's typically what's being forgotten.
How does this work with a traditional company, a traditional organization where you implement the DAO? What is the ecosystem then around this organization?
Yeah, so well, again, if you want to leverage blockchain technology to create a DAO and have DAO deliver value to a business, you have to take a step back and redesign the way your business model is made. Right? Because unless you're doing that, the technology that you're introducing there will just make it more expensive and slower. So the only thing that's going to work is if you will take a step back and think about a new model behind the business. Right? Model that relies on Web3 primitive, model that relies on clear incentivization schemes, and the transactions as well would be coming from the value that your company or your DAO creates to the outside world. Right? And those cannot be like license fees or annual payments and so forth. It all needs to be very granular.
Now, speaking of the value, because in the first session we had a very interesting dialogue with the guys from the DAO Hub that are also working on things like a beer DAO and some other really cool projects. But you can see from an EY perspective, like the real value that DAO is bringing to organizations.
Yeah.
What is the biggest value? What do you see now is like the biggest value with DAOs for organizations?
Yeah. So I see several so-called, shall we say, patterns of value creation. Some of them have to do with so-called competition, collaboration with competitors. So by means of establishing a DAO, you can de-risk competition between parties that are potentially sort of adverse to each other. Right? And that's one of the main drivers that nowadays businesses can bring to our users. Right? Instead of competing, we can collaborate around a certain idea, certain basically proposition towards the end client, even if we are competitors. So the shared value becomes something that we deliver to the client. However, DAO helps us to orchestrate rules of engagement and codify rules of engagement between our companies upfront, which has a lot of value because traditionally competition doesn't work because of those frictions associated with risks of collaboration. So that's one. Then DAO helps to basically fractionalize ownership of different things and sell fractionalized portions of either your assets, your capabilities, your utilities to the outside world. It helps with interoperability, so your solutions become automatically interoperable with the rest of the Web3. It helps to build transparency with regards to voting, and it helps, although it's anonymous, drive participation. Right? So all those value patterns need to be understood and realized while we are designing a new business model that can be supported by DAO, and therefore you cannot just apply it as is to an existing BV, LTD, and so forth.
What is, according to you, like the biggest obstacle to implementation right now? Is it like the lack of regulation or?
Well,
knowledge?
Well, I think it's mainly traction. It's of course the adverse reaction of the market now. So you know, many companies, many people are now in search for true value, true utility in all the DAO or DeFi types of protocols.
But do you say that like the companies, they see the crypto market, they see what's happening with FTX, etc., and this has a negative point towards their view on things like DAOs?
It has a certain negative brand equity, brand value when it comes to the whole ecosystem, of course. So it's a bit of a scar, and it takes time to heal.
Yeah. Now, DAOs, CBDCs, one of the things that you're also working on is stablecoins.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking like, you know, there are stablecoins like Tether and USDC, etc. So there's a few of them already exist. Do you create new stablecoins for organizations only, or how does it work?
Yeah, absolutely. So just a week ago, we had a workshop with ING on stablecoins, and you can, of course, observe that US-based stablecoins collateralized with US dollar, they are abundant. So you have USDC, but as a European investor, you also want to have a euro-denominated euro-based stablecoin. Why? Because you want to avoid FX risks. You want to make sure that when you invest, you can also earn certain interest on your stablecoins, your collateral. Right, so nowadays when interest rates went up, there is more intention, more business in euro-based stable coins, and that's why there's more traction in this field as well. And when it comes to stable coins, there are different ways of looking at it. Right, so stable coins sometimes are seen as almost CBDCs. Right, the only difference, of course, in a bit of a layman terms, that in case of stable coins, they are not backed by a legal tender of a central bank. However, smart banks take that chance, take that opportunity, deploy their own stablecoins to then in the future make sure to pave the way towards collaboration with a central bank on an implementation of a CBDC. Right, so stablecoins can be useful for that reason when it comes to banks, but also when it comes to traditional, let's say, providers that like to collateralize certain things and issue crypto assets on chain. Well, basically owning collateral creates financial opportunities, right? And now, again, with increased interest rates, euro-based stablecoins are quite an opportunity.
Interesting. So, because we saw like JP Morgan, I think, launching the first stablecoin as a JP Morgan coin. But do you say that, like, when you work with the traditional banks, it's not about creating your own stablecoin, but it's mainly about like earning money with handling stablecoins, or is it also about creating the infrastructure around stablecoins, like accepting them and sending them around the world?
Yeah. So typically there are, let's say, three key advantages to this. If you're a bank or if you're a provider that can do that, well, surely there's branding around it, because if you've created a stablecoin, well, there's certainly this brand, like, well, they can do stuff in crypto. Check. Right. The second advantage is the ecosystem outreach. So if you have your stablecoin in place, clearly if your customers are using it to pay for certain things, and in case of JPM, this is mainly a closed loop stablecoin, so it's only used within a certain number of institutions. Right? So in this case, you are increasing your outreach with regards to the ecosystem. You're building a network of more clients, more potential clients around your proposition. So if transacting becomes cheap, fast, you don't need to have a clearinghouse in place, well, then you have yourselves a very interesting proposition, and it helps you to, let's say, capture an additional share of the market. And the third piece is, as I mentioned, it's a hardcore financial upside that comes from using the collateral that is used, that is given to you by clients that want to have a stablecoin in place. So you can use it in all different ways.
Interesting to hear that, for example, you're working now with ING. I mean, would it be an option that Bert just mentioned, that like you see with CBDCs, that in the US, for example, they're now looking actually into legalizing, adopting stablecoins? Would it be an option that maybe the CBDC project in Europe is like collapsing, that it's, you know, it's failing massively, and that we will also adopt our own euro stablecoins here in the EU?
Well, I think we have too much already in place for it to collapse easily. And how I like to think about that, I like to think about it in scenarios. Right? So what are the key uncertainties that can drive those different futures? Well, those are geopolitical conflicts. If we will have much more God forbid, wars and pandemics, well, we have a lot of gray zone then suddenly, and people and companies and institutions would like to play in the gray zone because it's possible during the time of a turmoil. The next piece here is the technological, let's say, promise that blockchain has. So did we resolve scalability and performance concerns? The third piece is more about what a DAO-based business model promised to bring. So do they really bring the quality? Do they really bring the performance improvement? Yeah, and I say something else can be in, one of the important ones as well is the hegemony of national currencies. So would hegemony of US dollar, euro, pound, yen prevail, or would those national currencies become stable? Would people become nervous about them? So all of that defines the new futures for the stablecoin and digital asset landscape overall. So in some of those futures, yeah, the adoption can be quite quick. Existing rigid ecosystems and incrementalist thinking might collapse, and we will see ourselves that we have a sort of an inflow of adoption of what works from the traditional, let's say, well, traditional established crypto domain. Yeah. Totally possible. And I think some of that is already happening in emerging markets, right? But again, in established markets like Europe, this is highly dependent on those uncertainties which go into scenarios that I've just explained. Yeah. And in some of them, when, let's say, the euro is very stable, trust in institutions is there, blockchain technology proves a certain value, the regulation is against using crypto for, let's say, public good, well, in that case, I think we will see, again, incrementalist approach continuing and leading to a certain improvement. Right? Because there is either incrementalist, and then we are having the sequential model for payments and asset transfers just become faster, and all the hops become really quick, or we go sort of throw this away and we create instant finality-based clearinghouse lacking ecosystem that is more of a peer-to-peer. So that's the question.
Now we touched upon CBDCs, DAOs, stablecoins, but from an EY perspective, what are organizations usually most interested in when it comes to blockchain, Web3 technology? What kind of implementations, what kind of solutions?
Yes.
Are it like constructions like DAOs or just DeFi applications? Or?
So yeah, I mean, multiple clients are interested in different things. So from the, maybe you can split it in Web3 native companies versus traditional companies and incumbents. Well, incumbents really want to know, is there a place for me in the future? Can I play in the world of Web3, or am I going to be obsolete? That's the main question, yeah. Right? And then, well, it's our role to tell them, well, maybe you're going to be obsolete, so you better disrupt yourself before others did, and that's how you do it, right? Or sometimes we can say, no, nothing to worry about because your business is not being impacted at all. And when it comes to Web3 native companies that come to us, they do want to have a solid DAO established, for example, right? They want to have a DAO that is not sort of a gimmick. It's something that has a proper legal wrapper. It allows for fiat, on-ramp, off-ramp. It allows for legally sound ways of working with the DAO. So that would be another pattern of question. Yeah. Sometimes it also can have to do with crypto due diligences, to make sure that the companies that people want to invest in, crypto funds and so forth, are sound crypto companies. So tokenomics is good, they have good community, there is nothing in terms of fraud, nobody can do a rug pull, the ecosystem is sound, people are happy about them, technology is good, and so forth.
Lots of cool developments. Now, closing down this conversation, looking forward to the upcoming year when it comes to blockchain. I was just told I have to, when it comes to crypto, hide under a stone for the upcoming year. But when it comes to blockchain technology, what is the developments that you're really looking forward to in the upcoming year? What kind of new CBDC that will be launched or DAO that will be launched? What is the coolest development that you're looking forward to?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, no, honestly, I'd be mostly looking forward to the sentiment changing. So sentiment of fear changing to a sentiment of value creation, and I would be looking for reconciliation of all the doubts that people have around the crypto environment now, and more of a constructive dialogue with Web3 builders.
But that's a change I can see, like you want to really change this fear into more like people being positive again. But I mean, before it was quite positive, right? I mean, I think it's only the cases that we have with FTX and that kind of stuff that gave people fear again, right? Sure. And it will give them also in the upcoming year.
Yeah, yeah, but you know, before it was crazy positive. Now I'm hoping it's going to be enlightened. I'm hoping now it's going to be enlightened positive. We learned from our mistakes, and we are going to move on in a way that we understand our failures, our weaknesses, and we can create with smile.
Wow. It's also enlightened by this conversation. So Igor, thank you so much for joining us.
The pleasure is all mine.